That Christmas Eve, I huddled on the freezing attic floor, cheeks stinging from my stepmother's slap, locked away while they celebrated. I felt powerless until Grandpa threatened to sign the house over to me right then. Years later, reading a text excluding me from their dinner, I smiled. I was no longer that trapped girl, but the secret owner of the city's highest penthouse. This time, I decided who came inside and who stayed out in the cold. My name is Rosalie Brewer, and from where I stood, the world looked like a snow globe that someone had just shaken violently and then set down to settle in a glitter of electric light. I pressed my forehead against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my living room, feeling the biting cold of the Harborfield winter radiating through the double panes, contrasting sharply with the radiant heat rising from the heated limestone floors beneath my bare feet. Down below, 20 stories under my toes, the annual Christmas market was in full swing. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess of red and green awnings, tiny moving dots of people bundled in wool coats, and the sprawling lattice of fairy lights that draped over the city square like a golden fishing net. From up here, the noise was non-existent. The brass bands, the ringing bells, the shouting vendors selling roasted chestnuts and mulled wine were all silenced by excellent insulation and engineering. I liked it that way. I liked the silence. It was something I had bought and paid for. My phone vibrated on the marble kitchen island behind me, the sudden buzz cutting through the quiet like a physical intrusion. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark quartz countertop. It was a message from my father. I walked over, picking up the device with a hand that did not shake. I had been expecting this. It was December 20th, and the Brewer family logistics were always finalized 4 days before the holiday. It was a timeline set in stone, or rather, set in the erratic whims of my stepmother. The text was short. My father, Mark, had never been a man of many words, especially when those words were being dictated to him by someone else. Christmas Eve this year. Just Lena's family. Honey, for simplicity. I stared at the words. Just Lena's family. He did not say our family. He did not say the family. He said Lena's family. It was a Freudian slip that he probably did not even catch, typed out with his thumbs while sitting in his recliner. Likely while Lena was in the kitchen loudly complaining about the cost of turkeys or the guest list for the neighborhood potluck. For simplicity, that was the code word. It was the weaponized noun they had used against me for 2 decades. It was simpler not to set an extra plate. It was simpler not to explain why the daughter from the first marriage did not fit the aesthetic of the Christmas card. It was simpler to erase me than to integrate me. I typed back a single word. Okay. I hit send. I watched the delivery status change to delivered. Then I set the phone face down. A sudden phantom sting pricked at my neck, right below my ear. It was a somatic memory, a ghost of a sensation from a night years ago in Willow Creek, Ohio. I could almost smell the dust of fiberglass insulation and the musty scent of old cedar chests. I could feel the biting cold of the wooden floorboards of the attic in my childhood home, the place where I had learned that love in the Brewer household was conditional, and the conditions were entirely drafted by Lena. That night, I had been locked away because my existence was inconvenient, an unwanted footnote in their perfect holiday narrative. But the phantom pain faded as quickly as it had arrived, replaced by the humming reality of the present. I looked around the room. The irony was so rich it almost tasted like the vintage wine sitting in my temperature-controlled rack. Mark and Lena thought they were excluding a struggling, lonely girl, probably imagining me sitting in a cramped rental apartment heating up a frozen dinner. They imagined me powerless. They imagined me wanting. They had no idea that I was standing in the middle of the skyline penthouse. They did not know that the girl they had locked in a dark, dusty attic was now the owner of the highest residential point in Harborfield. This apartment was not just a home, it was a fortress. It spanned the entire top floor of a converted industrial brick building, a masterclass in architectural rehabilitation that had cost me $4 million and another $1 million in renovations. I walked through the open-concept living area, my fingers trailing over the back of a velvet sofa that cost more than Mark's sedan. The ceiling soared 18 feet high, supported by reclaimed timber beams that smelled of history and money. A floating staircase made of steel and tempered glass spiraled upward in the center of the room, leading to the feature that had made me buy this property the moment I saw the blueprints. The building used to be a textile factory with an old clock tower and utility lookout on the roof. When I renovated, I had that upper section gutted and transformed. I climbed the stairs now, the glass steps silent under my feet. I emerged into my private sanctuary. In the architectural plans, it was labeled the Observation Lounge. In my head, I called it the Glass Attic. It was a small, circular room, completely encased in glass. The walls were glass. The ceiling was a faceted dome of glass. It was suspended above the city, a transparent bubble floating in the winter sky. Unlike the attic in Willow Creek, which was dark, suffocating, and used for punishment, this space was made of light. It was designed to see everything while being touched by nothing. I had furnished it with a single, oversized leather reading chair, a soft cashmere throw, and a small majestic fir tree in the corner, decorated only with white lights. I sat in the chair, pulling the throw over my legs. Above me, the heavy gray clouds of the impending snowstorm churned, illuminated by the city glow from below. For simplicity, Dad had said. For years, I had accepted that role. I was the clutter to be cleared away. I was the logistical error to be corrected. But as I looked out over the city that I now quietly dominated, a cold, hard realization settled in my chest. I was done being the victim in their story. I was done waiting for an invitation to a table where I was expected to eat scraps and be grateful for the privilege. I was the host now. I had the space, I had the resources, and most importantly, I had the freedom. If they were going to have a Lena's family Christmas, then I would have a Brewer family Christmas, but it would be the real Brewer family, the ones who, like me, had been slowly pruned from the family tree because we did not fit Lena's picture-perfect suburban fantasy. I picked up my phone again. I unlocked it and opened my contacts list. I scrolled past Mark Brewer. I scrolled past the landline for the house in Willow Creek. I stopped at a name I had not dialed in 11 months. Aunt April. April was my father's younger sister. She was loud. She laughed with her mouth open, and she had a habit of dating men Lena considered blue-collar trash. Consequently, April was usually invited to Christmas lunch, but asked to leave before the important dinner guests arrived. 2 years ago, she stopped coming altogether. My thumb hovered over her name. Then there was Noah, my cousin, April's son, a musician who refused to cut his hair and played in indie bars. Lena called him a disappointment. I remembered him as the only person who snuck me a sandwich when I was grounded in my room during the Thanksgiving of 1999. And Aunt Caroline, the quiet one who moved 2 states away because she could not stand the bickering. And then, there was the most important name of all, Grandpa Walter. My heart squeezed tight in my chest. Grandpa Walter was 82 years old now. He lived alone in the old cottage on the edge of Willow Creek, the one place Lena refused to visit because it smelled like old people and dog hair. He was the only one who had come for me that night in the attic. He was the only one who saw me. I checked the time. It was 7 in the evening. They would all be home. They would all be making their own fragmented, lonely plans, assuming that the main event was happening at Mark and Lena's house, and that they simply hadn't made the cut. I looked up through the glass ceiling of my sanctuary. Snow had begun to fall. The first flakes landed softly on the glass, melting instantly against the warmth, then freezing again as the temperature dropped, forming tiny, intricate crystals. I wondered if I was making a mistake. Opening this door meant acknowledging the pain. It meant gathering the broken pieces of the family and trying to glue them together with nothing but expensive food and a view. It was risky. Maybe they would say no. Maybe they were used to the silence. But then I thought of the text message again. For simplicity. No, I was done with simple. I wanted complex. I wanted messy. I wanted real. I pressed the call button for Aunt April first. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. The sound of the ringtone echoed faintly in the glass dome. "Hello?" Her voice sounded tired, accompanied by the background noise of a television blaring a commercial for car insurance. "Aunt April," I said, my voice steady, stronger than I felt. "It's Rosalie." "Rosalie?" Her tone shifted instantly from fatigue to surprise. "Oh, honey, it has been so long. Is everything okay? Did something happen with your dad?" "No," I said, looking out at the sprawling, glittering city that lay at my feet. "Everything is fine. Actually, everything is better than fine. I was just calling because, well, I got the text about Christmas Eve." "Oh," April said, the awkwardness heavy in her voice. "Yeah, me too. Lena said they are keeping it intimate. I guess we didn't make the A-list this year. Huh?" She tried to laugh, but it sounded brittle. "I didn't make the list either," I said. "What? But you are his daughter." April sounded genuinely outraged. "It is okay. April, really," I cut in before she could launch into a tirade. "Because I decided I do not want to go there anyway. I am hosting Christmas this year, at my place, in Harborfield." "Harborfield?" April paused. "Honey, that is a 3-hour drive. And do you have room? I mean, I know you were working so hard on that startup, but living in the city is expensive. Noah and I, we are a lot to handle in a studio apartment." I smiled, a genuine, secret smile that no one could see. "I have room," I said softly. "Trust me. April, I have plenty of room. I want you to come, and bring Noah, and I'm calling Caroline, and I'm going to get Grandpa Walter." "Walter?" April gasped. "Rosalie. He has not left Willow Creek in 5 years. He hates the highway." "I will send a car for him," I said. "I will send a car for all of you if I have to. Just say yes. Please, I don't want to be alone this year, and I don't think you do either." There was a silence on the other end of the line. I could hear April breathing. I could hear the shift in the air, the sudden spark of hope in a holiday that had been written off as another dead day on the calendar. "Okay," April whispered. "Okay, Rosie, we will come." "Good," I said. "I will text you the address. Pack for a few days. We are going to do this right." I hung up. My hands were trembling slightly. Not from cold, but from adrenaline. One down. I stared at the name Grandpa Walter on my screen. This was the big one. This was the call that would change everything. If I brought Walter here, if I showed him what I had built, it would be the final validation of the promise we made in the dark all those years ago. I pressed dial. As the phone began to ring, I looked up at the glass apex of my roof. It was a strange feeling, standing here in a glass box in the sky. Years ago, an attic had been my prison. It had been the place where I was hidden away to keep the family picture perfect. Now, I was building a new family picture, and this time, the attic was not where you went to be forgotten. It was where you went to see the truth. "Hello?" A gruff, raspy voice answered. It sounded older than I remembered, weaker, but the edge of steel was still there. "Grandpa," I said, leaning back into the soft leather of my chair, watching the snow begin to swirl faster above me. "It's Rosalie. Pack your bags. I'm coming to get you." The wind howled outside, buffeting the glass, but inside, it was warm. The game had changed. The pieces were moving, and for the first time in my life, I was the one deciding where they would land. To understand why I stood in a multi-million-dollar penthouse plotting a systematic dismantling of my family's holiday peace, you have to understand the geography of Willow Creek, Ohio. It was the kind of town that looked like a greeting card illustration in December. The main street was always draped in heavy garlands of spruce and holly. The lampposts were wrapped in red velvet ribbons, and the air always smelled of wood smoke and impending snow. It was beautiful in a way that demanded you pay attention to it. But for me, the beauty of Willow Creek stopped at the threshold of the Brewer family home. My father, Mark Brewer, was a man who understood engines better than he understood people. He owned a small auto repair garage on the edge of town, a place of grease and concrete and the constant, rhythmic clanging of metal on metal. He was a good mechanic, arguably the best in the county, but he was a man hollowed out by grief. My mother had died when I was 8 years old, leaving behind a silence in our house that my father never knew how to fill. He tried to fill it with work. He tried to fill it with late nights at the garage. And eventually, 2 years later, he tried to fill it with Lena. Lena did not walk into a room. She made an entrance. She was vibrant, loud, and undeniably charismatic, the kind of woman who knew exactly how to tilt her head to catch the light. She came as a package deal with her daughter, Madison, who was my age exactly. Madison was a miniature version of Lena, all blonde curls and practiced smiles, trained from birth to be the center of attention. When they moved in, the silence in our house didn't just disappear, it was aggressively evicted. The dynamic of our new family established itself with terrifying speed, specifically around Christmas time. The first Christmas with Lena set the template for the next decade. I remember walking into the living room on Christmas morning, my heart doing that foolish, hopeful flutter that children get. The tree was magnificent. Lena had insisted on a theme, gold and white that year, and had banished my mother's old, mismatched ornaments to the basement. Under the tree, the pile of gifts was enormous, a mountain of shimmering paper and satin bows. I sat on the carpet, tucking my knees to my chest. Madison sat on the sofa, looking like a princess in her flannel pajamas. Mark, my father, sat in his armchair with his camcorder, filming the event. "Go on, Maddie," Lena cooed. "Open the big one first." Madison tore into the paper. It was a karaoke machine, then a designer coat, then a jewelry-making kit, then a set of encyclopedias she needed for school. The paper flew, the camera zoomed, and the oohs and ahs filled the room. Then it was my turn. I reached for a box wrapped in plain red paper. It was lighter than Madison's. I opened it. It was a winter coat, a sensible, dark wool coat. "You needed a new one," Lena said, her voice practical, stripping the magic away before I could even thank her. "Your old one was looking ragged. Rosalie, we can't have you walking to school looking like a beggar." I opened the next one. Thick wool socks. The next, a set of school notebooks. There was no karaoke machine. There was no jewelry kit. There was nothing that whispered. "I saw this and thought of you. There were only things that said, 'I noticed you needed this to function.' So here it is." 1 year, when I was 10. I sat there after opening my pile of essentials, waiting for the fun gift. I knew there had to be one. I had asked for a specific book series for months. I waited. The wrapping paper debris was cleared away. Dad put the lens cap back on the camera. "All right," Lena clapped her hands. "Breakfast time. Who wants waffles?" I sat frozen. "Is that it?" I asked, my voice small. Lena stopped halfway to the kitchen. She looked at me, then at the empty space under the tree, and let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, goodness, Rosalie, honey, I think I left one of yours on the kitchen counter. I was wrapping it late last night and must have forgotten to move it." She didn't go get it. She just walked into the kitchen to start the batter. I had to walk into the kitchen myself, retrieve the gift from next to the toaster, and open it alone while she whisked eggs. It was the books I wanted, but the joy was gone, replaced by the cold knowledge that I was an afterthought. I was something to be managed, not celebrated. That was when I started retreating to the attic. The attic in our Willow Creek house was not like the glass sanctuary I would build years later. It was raw and unfinished. To get there, you had to pull down a creaky set of folding stairs from the hallway ceiling. It smelled of fiberglass insulation, old cedar chests, and the sharp, dry scent of dust. The floorboards were rough plywood that snagged my socks. It was freezing in the winter because the heat from the furnace rarely reached that high, and sweltering in the summer. But it was mine. It was filled with the debris of previous lives, broken lamps, stacks of National Geographic magazines from the 1970s, and heavy trunks filled with my mother's clothes that Lena had insisted be moved out of the master bedroom. There was a small, round window at the far end that looked out over the pine forest behind our property. I created a nest there. I dragged up old blankets and made a pile near the window. I brought up a flashlight for when the single bare bulb wasn't enough. While Madison was downstairs practicing her flute or modeling her new clothes for Lena's friends, I was up there, wrapped in 3 layers of wool, reading the books I had been given. I breathed in the smell of the dust and the pine trees, and for a few hours, I didn't have to control my face. Downstairs, I had to smile. I had to be grateful. I had to pretend I didn't notice the disparity. In the attic, I could just be. The turning point, the moment I realized my role wasn't just accidental but assigned, happened when I was 12 going on 13. It was the year Lena decided to host the neighborhood Christmas Eve open house. The preparation was military in its precision. The house was scrubbed until it smelled of bleach and pine oil. "Rosalie!" Lena barked at me from the bottom of the stairs. "Come down here. We need the extra decorations from the storage." I was wearing jeans and an old sweater. Madison was already dressed for the party in a crushed velvet dress the color of cranberry wine. Her hair was curled into perfect ringlets. She looked like a doll. "Mark, look at her," Lena gushed, adjusting a bow in Madison's hair. Dad looked up from his newspaper. He was always hiding behind a newspaper or a hood of a car, and smiled. "Beautiful, Maddie, just beautiful." I walked past them, invisible in my utility. The boxes marked foyer and garland. "Rosalie," Lena directed, not looking at me. "Bring them down, and be careful. Do not drag them on the hardwood." For the next hour, while Madison sat on the piano bench practicing the carol she would play for the guests, I hauled heavy plastic bins down the narrow attic stairs. I was sweating. My hair was a mess, and my fingernails were covered in gray dust. I was the stagehand. Madison was the talent. When the guests arrived, the house was full of laughter and the clinking of glasses. I had changed into a clean shirt, but I still felt the grime of the attic on my skin. I hovered near the kitchen doorway, holding a tray of appetizers I had been told to refill. Lena was holding court in the living room with Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Higgins, 2 neighbors who loved gossip as much as they loved eggnog. "Madison is just so gifted," Lena was saying, her voice carrying over the low hum of jazz music. "She got the solo in the church choir. You know, she really is the star of this house. We are so lucky." "And what about Rosalie?" Mrs. Gable asked. It was a polite question, a mandatory inquiry. I froze. I gripped the silver tray so hard my knuckles turned white. I waited for my father to speak up, to say I was doing well in math, or that I had helped fix a carburetor at the shop, or anything. But Dad was across the room, pouring punch. Lena smiled, a tight, benevolent smile. "Oh, Rosalie, well, you know Rosalie. She is sturdy." Sturdy, the word hung in the air like a brick. "She is so strong," Lena continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that I could hear perfectly. "She is very independent. She is used to doing things on her own. She doesn't need much, really, not like Madison. Madison is sensitive. She needs nurturing, Rosalie. Well, she is like her mother was. Quiet, self-sufficient. She is fine in the background." She took a sip of her wine. "Honestly, it is a relief. Having one high-maintenance child is enough work. Rosalie just takes care of herself." I backed away into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Sturdy, background, doesn't need much. It wasn't that they forgot to love me. It was that they had decided I didn't require it. They had looked at my grief, my silence after my mother died, and they hadn't seen a child in pain. They had seen a convenience. They had labeled my trauma as independence so they wouldn't have to do the work of parenting me. Madison got the love because she demanded it. I got the chores because I endured them. I put the tray down on the counter. I didn't want to serve them. I didn't want to be the sturdy girl anymore. I walked past the party, weaving through the adults who didn't look down to see me, and climbed the stairs. I pulled down the attic hatch. I climbed up into the dark, cold space and pulled the stairs up behind me, sealing myself in. I sat in the dark for what felt like hours. I could hear the muffled sounds of Jingle Bell Rock thumping through the floorboards. I was crying, silent, hot tears that felt like acid on my cheeks. I hated them. I hated the red dress. I hated the word sturdy. Then, I heard the hatch creak. I wiped my face frantically. I expected it to be Lena, coming to scold me for abandoning my post with the appetizers. But the head that popped up through the floor wasn't blonde. It was gray. It was Grandpa Walter. My father's father. He was a man built from iron and silence, a veteran who walked with a limp from a war he never talked about. He had a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite, but his eyes were surprisingly soft. He groaned as he climbed the last few steps, clutching his bad knee. He was holding 2 mugs in one large, calloused hand. "Figured I would find you up here," he grunted. He didn't ask why I was crying. He didn't tell me to go downstairs and be polite. He just limped over to my pile of blankets and sat down on a trunk with a heavy sigh. The air in the attic was freezing, but he didn't seem to notice. "Here," he said, handing me one of the mugs. "Cocoa, snuck it past the warden." He meant Lena. I took the mug. The warmth of the ceramic seeped into my cold fingers. "Thank you," I whispered. We sat in silence for a long time. The only light came from the moon shining through the round window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "I hate it down there," I said, the confession tumbling out before I could stop it. Walter took a sip of his cocoa. "Me too, kid. Too much noise. Too much fake smiling. Your dad. He is a good man, Rosalie, but he is weak. He lets the loudest person in the room steer the ship because he is afraid of the waves." It was the first time anyone had ever validated what I saw. My father wasn't just busy. He was hiding. "Lena says I am sturdy," I said, the word tasting like bile. "She says I don't need anything." Grandpa Walter turned to look at me, in the moonlight. His face was serious. He reached out and placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You are strong, Rosalie, but not for the reasons she thinks. She thinks you are strong because it makes her life easier, but you are strong because you are surviving a war they don't even know is happening." He gestured around the dusty, cluttered attic. "You know," he said, his voice dropping to a rumble. "In the army, the general sat in the tent with the maps, but the sniper, the lookout, they sat up high. They sat on the roofs, in the towers, in the attics of the bombed-out buildings. It was lonely up there, cold. But you know what?" I shook my head. "The people in the attic are the only ones who see the whole picture," he said. "They see the enemy coming. They see the truth of the terrain. Down there." He pointed to the floor, toward the party. "They are just marching in circles, looking at each other. Up here, you can see everything." He squeezed my shoulder. "Don't let them make you think this place is a punishment. Rosie, it is a vantage point. You watch them, you learn how they work, and one day, you are going to walk down those stairs, and you are going to know exactly how to outmaneuver the whole lot of them." He stayed with me until my cocoa was finished. He told me a story about a winter in 1952, about a stray dog he found in a trench, about how the quietest moments were the only ones that mattered. When we finally went downstairs, the party was winding down. Lena gave me a sharp look, annoyed at my absence, but when she saw Walter behind me, she swallowed her words. She was afraid of him. He was the only thing in the Brewer family she couldn't decorate or control. That night, I lay in my bed, listening to the wind howl outside. I thought about the attic. I thought about the word sturdy. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a spy. I felt like a lookout. I was the girl in the attic, and Grandpa was right. I was seeing the truth, and I promised myself, staring at the ceiling, that I would never forget what I saw. But even with Grandpa's words armoring me, I didn't know that the attic would eventually stop being a refuge and become a prison. I didn't know that 6 years later, the lock would turn from the outside, and the cold would stop being a choice. The winter I turned 19. I came home from Northlake University with a suitcase full of dirty laundry and a head full of naive hope. I had been away for 4 months, living in a dorm room that smelled of instant noodles and cheap body spray. But it was the first time in my life I had breathed air that did not feel filtered through my stepmother's approval. Distance had made me optimistic. I thought, foolishly, that perhaps my absence had made the heart grow fonder. I thought that because I was technically an adult now, a college student with a GPA and a life of my own, the dynamic in the Brewer house might have shifted. I was wrong. The dynamic had not shifted. It had calcified. I walked into the house on Christmas Eve to find it transformed into a stage set. Lena had outdone herself. The banister was wrapped in fresh pine garland that smelled sharp and expensive. The dining table was set for 20 people with crystal that caught the light of the chandelier and fractured it into 1,000 rainbows. And in the center of it all was Madison. She was wearing a dress of deep midnight blue velvet that hugged her waist and flared out at the hips, making her look like a darker, more sophisticated version of Cinderella. She was beaming, holding a glass of sparkling cider, practicing her speech. "And then I will welcome everyone to the charity auction," Madison was saying to the empty room, gesturing gracefully, "since I was chosen as the lead host for the winter gala." "Chin up, honey," Lena corrected from the kitchen doorway. "Project your voice. You are the star, not the background music." I stood in the entryway with my duffel bag, feeling the cold draft from the door on my back. "Hi," I said. Lena turned. Her eyes raked over my jeans and my heavy university parka. There was no hug. There was no "welcome home." "Rosalie," she said, her tone implying that I was early or late, or simply inconvenient. "You are here. Good. Do not leave that bag in the hall. Guests will be arriving in 2 hours." "I can help with the food," I offered, trying to bridge the gap. "I learned how to make a really good glaze for—" "No," Lena cut me off. "The menu is already set. The caterers are handling the heavy lifting. If you want to be useful, get those boxes of extra ornaments out of the hallway and take them up to the attic. And for heaven's sake, Rosalie, stay out of the way once people start arriving. Madison needs to focus, and you know how you get. Cluttered." Cluttered, that was a new one. I spent the next hour hauling plastic bins up the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic. It was freezing up there. The insulation I had grown up with had thinned, and the wind rattled the roof tiles. Every time I came down, the house was a little more crowded, a little louder, a little more perfect. By 7 o'clock, the party was in full swing. I had changed into a simple black dress, the nicest thing I owned, and was standing near the buffet table, trying to make myself small. Mark, my father, was circling the room with a glass of scotch, shaking hands, playing the part of the successful local businessman. He looked right through me twice. I was about to retreat to the kitchen when I heard it. Lena was standing near the fireplace with the pastor's wife and the town mayor. She was flushed with wine and the intoxication of being the hostess. "Madison is just a natural," the pastor's wife was saying. "So poised." "She is an angel," Lena agreed, beaming. "She brings so much light into this house. It is such a blessing, especially compared to—" She lowered her voice, but in the acoustics of the high-ceilinged room, it carried like a gunshot. "Well, compared to the alternative, Rosalie is just so heavy. She has that dark cloud over her, just like her mother did. Always the victim, always making you feel guilty for being happy. Honestly, sometimes I think the depression is genetic." The room went silent for me. The chatter, the jazz music, the clinking of silverware, it all dropped away. I had spent 19 years biting my tongue. I had spent 19 years accepting the words sturdy and independent as code for unloved. But hearing her twist my mother's memory, my mother who had died young, who had loved me, who had been erased from this house photo by photo, something in me snapped. It was a cold, hard snap, like a branch breaking under the weight of too much snow. I walked into the center of the circle. "Do not talk about her," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was steady. Lena turned, her smile faltering for a fraction of a second before she tried to recover. "Rosalie, I didn't see you skulking there." I said, "Do not talk about my mother," I repeated, louder this time. "You can treat me like the maid. You can pretend I don't exist. but you do not get to stand there drinking wine and calling my dead mother a dark cloud to your friends." The conversation in the room halted. Madison stopped laughing across the room. My father froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. Lena's face went from surprise to a shade of furious red that matched the holly berries on the mantel. She set her glass down with a sharp clink. "How dare you?" she hissed, stepping closer to me. "How dare you make a scene in my house on Christmas Eve?" "It is my house, too," I said, my voice shaking now. "And it was her house before it was yours." "Mark!" Lena shrieked, turning to my father. "Are you going to let her speak to me like this? She is ruining everything, just like I said she would." My father looked at Lena. He looked at the mayor. He looked at me, and then he looked at his shoes. "Rosalie," he mumbled, his voice weak. "Just apologize to Lena. It is Christmas." The betrayal hit me harder than any physical blow. He wasn't just passive. He was complicit. "No," I said. "I won't." Lena moved faster than I expected. She stepped forward and her hand lashed out, catching me hard across the cheek. The sound of the slap was sickeningly loud in the quiet room. My head snapped to the side, my ear ringing. "You ungrateful little brat," Lena spat, her mask of sophistication completely gone. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "I am not going to have you poisoning this night for Madison. Get out." She dragged me toward the hallway. I was too stunned to fight back. She shoved me toward the pull-down stairs of the attic, which were still down from my earlier chores. "Get up there," she commanded. "You can sit in the dark and think about your attitude until you are ready to come down on your knees and beg my forgiveness." "You can't do this," I gasped, clutching the railing. "I am 19 years old." "As long as you are under my roof, you are a child," she screamed. "Go!" She pushed me. I stumbled up the first few steps. Before I could turn around, she slammed the hatch shut. Darkness swallowed me. A second later, I heard the distinct, metallic click of the padlock hasp sliding into place. She had locked it. I stood there in the pitch black, my cheek throbbing, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I reached up and pushed against the wooden hatch. It didn't budge. I pounded on it with my fist. "Open the door!" I yelled. Dad, open the door!" There was no answer. From below, I heard Lena's voice, muffled but audible. "So sorry, everyone. Just a little family drama. Teenagers. You know? Let's get the music back on." And then, the music started. Winter Wonderland. I slumped down on the dusty floorboards. The attic was freezing. I could see my breath in the thin sliver of moonlight coming from the round window. I was wearing a dress with thin straps. The cold began to seep into my bones immediately. I pulled a dusty drop cloth off an old lamp and wrapped it around my shoulders, huddling against the chimney stack for warmth. I sat there for what felt like hours. I could hear the party below. I could hear bursts of laughter. I could hear the clinking of glasses. They were eating dinner. They were opening gifts. They were celebrating the birth of a savior while I sat 10 feet above their heads, shivering in the dust. The realization washed over me, colder than the Ohio winter. It wasn't just that they didn't love me. It was that my suffering meant nothing to them. It was acceptable collateral damage for their perfect evening. I wasn't a person to them. I was a problem that had been filed away in a cabinet. I stopped crying. The tears were freezing on my face anyway. I just sat there, shaking, listening to the wind howl outside, feeling a hard, cold knot of hatred form in my chest. Then, the sound of the wind changed. I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. It was faint, but distinct. Then the heavy slam of a car door. Someone had arrived late. The snow had been falling heavy all evening, turning the roads into treacherous sheets of ice. Most guests had arrived hours ago. I pressed my ear to the floorboards. Downstairs, the doorbell rang. I heard the door open. A gust of wind must have blown into the foyer because I heard someone gasp. "Walter!" It was my father's voice. "We didn't think you would make it. The roads are terrible." "Grandpa!" My heart leaped into my throat. I have driven through worse than this in a tank. Mark? Grandpa Walter's voice rumbled. It was rough, breathless. He was getting old, but it was unmistakably him. I heard the heavy thud of his cane on the hardwood floor. Thump, step, thump, step. Here, let me take your coat. Lena's voice was syrupy sweet again. We saved you a plate. Walter, Madison is just about to sing. I saw Rosalie's car in the driveway, Walter said. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask about the turkey. He cut straight to the point. Oh, Lena paused. I could imagine the fake smile plastered on her face. Yes, she is here. Where? Walter asked. She is taking a little time out, Lena said. She was feeling a bit overwhelmed. You know how moody she gets. She decided to go lie down and cool off. Cool off? Walter repeated. It is 10 degrees below zero outside. Her car has snow on the hood, so she has been here a while. Where is she? Mark? Silence. My father didn't answer. Mark. Walter's voice dropped an octave. It was the voice of a man who used to command platoons. I am going to ask you one more time. Where is my granddaughter? She is in the attic, Lena snapped, her patience fraying. She was being disrespectful. She insulted me in front of the mayor. She needs to learn her place. The attic, Walter said. The word hung in the air. She is fine, Dad. Mark tried to intervene. She just needs to calm down. I heard the thump step of the cane again, moving faster this time. He was coming toward the hallway. Grandpa, I screamed, pressing my face to the floorboards. Grandpa, I am here. They locked me in. The footsteps stopped directly beneath me. Rosie? His voice was muffled by the wood, but filled with a sudden, terrifying urgency. I am here, I sobbed. It is cold. Lena took the key. There was a moment of silence, and then I heard a sound I will never forget. It was the sound of Grandpa Walter's cane smashing into the wall. Give me the key, Walter roared. The music downstairs stopped abruptly. Walter, you are making a scene, Lena cried out, sounding shrill. She is a grown woman. She can handle a time out. She is a human being, Walter bellowed. She is your husband's daughter, and you locked her in an unheated attic in the middle of a blizzard? I heard scrambling. Mark, do something, Lena yelled. Dad, please, Mark stammered. You are going to give yourself a heart attack. If I die tonight, Mark, Walter said, his voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like heat radiating through the floor. I swear to God, I will die changing my will. Give me the key. Lena, right now, or I walk out that door. I call my lawyer, and I sign every single acre, every single dollar, and this house over to the church. You will be on the street before my body is cold. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. The threat was real. They knew Walter. They knew he didn't bluff. I was just trying to teach her a lesson. Lena stammered, her voice small and trembling. The key, Walter demanded. I heard the jingle of metal. Then, the heavy, frantic footsteps of my father coming up the hall. The padlock clicked. The hatch was yanked down. Light flooded into the attic, blinding me. My father stood at the bottom of the stairs, looking pale and terrified, but I didn't look at him. I looked past him to the old man in the heavy wool coat, his face gray with exhaustion, his chest heaving, leaning heavily on his cane. His eyes were wet. Come down, Rosie, Grandpa said, his voice breaking. Come down. You are done with this house. I stood up, my legs numb, shaking uncontrollably. I walked down the stairs, past my father who wouldn't meet my eyes. I walked straight to Grandpa Walter. He wrapped his arm around me. He smelled of cold air, tobacco, and safety. He turned to look at Mark and Lena, who were standing by the living room archway, the guests staring in horror from behind them. Merry Christmas, Walter spat at them. I hope it was worth it. He turned me toward the door. Let's go, kid. We are leaving. The adrenaline that had fueled Grandpa Walter's rage in the hallway seemed to evaporate the moment we crossed the threshold into the kitchen. leaving behind only the fragile trembling of an old man and the violent shivering of a frozen girl. He did not take me out the front door immediately. I think he knew that if I walked out into the snow in that thin dress, I would shatter. Instead, he guided me into the one room where the party guests were not currently congregating, the space that smelled of roasting turkey and failure. He sat me down on a wooden stool near the radiator. His hands, usually so steady, shook as he filled a kettle. I wrapped my arms around myself, my teeth chattering so hard I thought they might crack. Through the swinging door, the sounds of the Christmas party drifted in. Laughter, the clinking of silverware, the upbeat tempo of a holiday jazz standard. It was surreal. 10 feet away, people were eating cranberry sauce, completely indifferent to the fact that I had just been extracted from a freezing box like a discarded toy. Grandpa placed a mug of hot tea in my hands. The ceramic burned my fingers, but the pain felt good. It felt real. "Drink," he commanded softly. I drank. The hot liquid scalded my throat, thawing the ice in my chest. Grandpa leaned against the counter, watching me. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The fire that had decimated Lena in the hallway was gone, replaced by a heavy gray sorrow. "Rosalie," he said, his voice rough. "Look at me." I looked up. My eyes were swollen, my cheeks still throbbing from Lena's slap. "Do you want to live in a house where your only assigned seat is in the attic?" he asked. It was not a rhetorical question. He was asking me to evaluate my reality. I don't have anywhere else to go," I whispered. "I have another semester of school. I can't afford the dorms during the break. Dad says—" "Forget what your father says," Walter cut in, though his tone was not angry at me. "Mark has spent 20 years saying nothing while that woman rewrote the history of this family. I am asking you, can you stay here and survive?" Before I could answer, the swinging door pushed open. My father walked in. He looked harried, his tie loosened, a sheen of sweat on his forehead. He stopped when he saw us, offering a weak, pleading smile. "Dad, please," Mark started, keeping his voice low so the guests wouldn't hear. "Come back out. People are asking. We can smooth this over. Lena is just... She is high-strung. She didn't mean to lock it. It was a heat-of-the-moment thing. She is under a lot of pressure with the hosting." He was doing it again. He was sanding down the edges of the abuse until it looked like an accident. Grandpa Walter did not move from the counter. He just stared at his son. "A heat-of-the-moment thing is burning a roast." "Mark," Grandpa said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Locking your child in a freezing attic because she defended her dead mother is not a mistake. It is a pattern. And you, standing there and letting it happen, that is a choice." "I have to live with her. Dad," Mark whispered, the truth finally leaking out. It was the most pathetic admission I had ever heard. "I have to keep the peace." "You are not keeping the peace," Walter said. "You are keeping a hostage." Grandpa turned his back on his son. He looked at me. "Finish your tea, Rosie. We are going to my house. You are not sleeping under this roof tonight." We left through the back door. I didn't say goodbye to my father. I didn't look at him. I walked out into the biting wind, and for the first time, the cold didn't bother me. We drove in silence to Grandpa's small, drafty cottage on the edge of town. It was a clutter of books, old war memorabilia, and the smell of pipe tobacco. It was the only place in the world that felt safe. He took me into his study, a small room lined with dark wood. He didn't turn on the overhead light, just the small green desk lamp. He sat down heavily in his leather chair and pulled a thick manila envelope from the top drawer. "I was going to wait," he said, tapping the envelope. "I was going to wait until I was gone, but I saw something in your eyes tonight. Rosie, I saw you starting to believe them. I saw you starting to believe that you deserved the cold." He slid the papers across the desk toward me. "Read it." I opened the folder. It was a legal document, a draft of a last will and testament. I scanned the legalese, my eyes widening as I reached the distribution of assets. The property located at 440 Oak Street, the terrifyingly large savings account at First National, The plot of land in the county. It is everything, I whispered, looking up at him. Grandpa, this is everything. What about Dad? What about— Mark made his choice, Walter said, his face hard. He chose his new life. He chose the luxury and the parties and the silence. He doesn't need my money to buy more things to ignore you with. He leaned forward. But this comes with a condition, Rosalie. I held my breath. I am not giving this to you so you can stay in Willow Creek and fight them, he said. I am giving this to you so you can leave. If you stay here, this town will eat you alive. You will always be the poor girl, the stepdaughter, the one who didn't quite fit. I want you to take this knowledge, that you have a future, that you have resources, and I want you to go, build something they can't touch. You want me to leave you? I asked, a lump forming in my throat. I want you to leave the attic, he corrected. Your father put you there. Tonight, I opened the door. But you, Rosalie, you have to be the one to walk out. And you have to keep walking. He picked up a pen. I am calling my lawyer first thing in the morning to finalize this. It will be our secret. Mark won't know. Lena won't know. As far as they are concerned, you are just a broke college student scraping by. Let them think that. Let them underestimate you. But promise me. He looked me dead in the eye. Promise me you won't come back here begging for a place under their tree. Promise me you will build your own damn tree. I looked at the old man, the only person who had ever fought for me. I thought of the humiliating silence of the attic. I thought of my father's weak smile in the kitchen. I promise, I said. The next morning, the sun was blindingly bright on the snow, mocking the darkness of the night before. Grandpa drove me back to my father's house one last time so I could pack my actual suitcase. I walked into the house, bracing myself for a fight. But there was no fight. There was something worse. There was normalcy. Lena was in the kitchen, making pancakes. She was humming. When I walked in, she didn't look up, didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the slap or the padlock. Oh, you are back, she said airily. Try to be quiet getting your things. Madison is still sleeping. She was so exhausted after her performance last night. She was brilliant. By the way, a shame you missed it. I stood there, stunned. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was rewriting reality in real time, erasing the violence and replacing it with mundane domesticity. Mark was sitting at the table, reading the paper. He lowered it slightly, saw me, and gave a quick, nervous nod before raising it again. Safe drive back to school, he mumbled into the newsprint. I went upstairs. I packed my clothes. I stripped my bed. The room felt foreign already, like a museum exhibit of a life I had already left. On my way out, I bumped into Madison on the stairs. She was wearing silk pajamas, looking sleepy and soft. Leaving? She asked, stifling a yawn. Yes, I said. Good, she said, leaning against the banister. Honestly, Rosalie, I hope you are not going to make a big deal out of last night. Mom was just stressed. You really shouldn't try to make everything so dramatic all the time. It is exhausting for the rest of us. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had watched me get dragged away and said nothing. Don't worry, I said, hoisting my bag onto my shoulder. The drama is over. I walked out the front door and I didn't look back. Grandpa Walter was waiting by his beat-up sedan at the curb. He didn't say a word as I threw my bag in the back. He drove me to the Greyhound bus station on the other side of town. The bus was idling, spewing gray exhaust into the crisp winter air. I turned to him. There were 1,000 things I wanted to say, but the lump in my throat was too big. He pulled me into a hug. It was a crushing, desperate hug, the kind that tries to transfer strength from one body to another. He smelled of old wool and sadness. Go, he whispered into my hair. He pulled back and shoved a thick white envelope into my gloved hand. What is this? I asked. Late Christmas money, he said gruffly, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. For the rest of your life, don't spend it on socks. Spend it on freedom. I climbed onto the bus. I found a seat by the window. As the engine roared and the heavy wheels began to turn, I looked out. Grandpa Walter was standing there. a solitary gray figure against the white snow, leaning on his cane, watching me go. He didn't wave. He just stood guard until I was out of sight. I clutched the envelope to my chest. Inside, I knew, was the start of the secret that would eventually build a penthouse. But as Willow Creek faded into the distance, blurring behind a veil of tears and dirty window glass, I felt a sharp, severing pain in my chest. I was free, but the cost of my freedom was that I was now completely alone. I made a vow then. Staring at the passing telephone poles, I would never be cold again, I would never be hungry again, and I would never, ever let anyone else hold the key to my life. I was done with attics. Next time, I would own the roof. I returned to Northlake University not as a student coming back from a holiday break, but as a fugitive seeking asylum in the only place that would take me. The campus was largely deserted, the dorms echoing and cold, but it was a paradise compared to the attic in Willow Creek. I threw myself into my systems engineering major with the desperation of someone who knew that their brain was the only asset that could not be locked away or signed over to a stepmother. For the next 4 years, I did not sleep. That is not an exaggeration. I constructed a life that was a marvel of logistical efficiency, simply because I could not afford the luxury of wasted time. By day, I was a student and a teaching assistant for the freshman calculus classes. In the early mornings, from 5 to 9, I was a barista at a campus coffee shop, my hands permanently smelling of burnt espresso and sanitizer, and by night, from 10 in the evening until 3 in the morning, I worked at a massive distribution center for a shipping company on the edge of the city. It was the night shift that changed me. While my classmates were throwing keg parties or complaining about their allowances, I was standing on a concrete floor in steel-toed boots, watching thousands of packages whiz by on conveyor belts. I became obsessed with the flow of things. I watched how a single snowstorm in Denver could cause a bottleneck that left a grandmother in Florida without her medication 3 days later. I watched how the system broke down the moment the variables became unpredictable. My Christmases during those years were studies in solitude. I stayed in the dorms, or later, in a drafty studio apartment above a laundromat. I remember one specific Christmas Eve when I was 21. I had worked a double shift. I came home to a radiator that was hissing but producing no heat. I had a packet of instant noodles and a packet of hot cocoa mix, but I didn't have a kettle, so I mixed the cocoa powder with lukewarm water from the bathroom tap. It remained clumpy and tasted like chalk. I sat by my window, wrapped in the wool coat I had received from Lena years ago, the practical gift, and looked across the alleyway. Through the window of the adjacent building, I could see a family. They were wearing matching pajamas. They were laughing. The golden light from their living room spilled out onto the snow in the alley, stopping just inches from my wall. I did not cry. I had promised Grandpa Walter I was done crying. Instead, I analyzed. I looked at that family and realized they were a closed system. I was an outlier. And in the world of logistics, outliers were errors. They were packages with smudged labels. They were the things that got lost. But as I watched the trucks rumble past on the highway in the distance, I realized something else. In a well-designed system, nothing gets lost. Every item has a destination. Every item has a value. If a package is lost, it is not the package's fault. It is the system's fault. I wasn't broken. My family's system was broken, and I was going to build a better one. The idea for Aurora Lane Systems was born on the floor of that warehouse during a February blizzard. The trucks were grounded, the managers were screaming, the software they used was rigid, unable to account for the dynamic shifting of ice on the roads. I started writing code on the back of shipping manifests. I realized that if we treated delivery trucks not like fixed trains on a track, but like fluid water seeking the path of least resistance, we could keep moving when the main arteries were clogged. I recruited 2 friends from the engineering department, Ben and Sarah. We were all broke, all hungry, and all tired of being told how the world worked by people who had never worked a night shift in their lives. We rented a corner of a decaying co-working space down by the train tracks. It was a miserable room with peeling paint and a heater that rattled like a dying lung. The air always smelled of ozone from the trains and the acrid scent of the cheap, burnt coffee we brewed by the gallon. We called it Aurora Lane. It was named after the street where the distribution center stood, the place where the lights cut through the darkest winter nights. For 3 years, we were ghosts. We worked 18 hours a day. I missed birthdays. I missed holidays. I didn't date. I didn't go to movies. I poured every ounce of my energy into the algorithm. I was building a digital map of the world where nothing would ever get stuck in the cold again. The breakthrough happened during the Great Midwest Freeze of 2018. It was a storm of the century event. Highways were shut down across 5 states. The big logistics giants, the ones with billions of dollars and fancy headquarters, were paralyzed. Their trucks were jackknifed or idling in lots, waiting for instructions that never came. But Aurora Lane was live. We had just secured a pilot contract with a network of rural hospitals and clinics. While the giants froze, our system woke up. It began rerouting independent courier vans down back roads that the satellites showed were clear. It coordinated handoffs between drivers in parking lots. It treated the fleet like a swarm of bees rather than a convoy of tanks. That night, while the news was broadcasting stories of stranded travelers, we were quietly moving dialysis fluid, insulin, and emergency blood supplies through the eye of the storm. We sat in our freezing office, huddled around a bank of monitors, watching the little green dots of our drivers moving across the map while the red dots of the competition stood still. At 4 a.m, we got a call from a hospital administrator in rural Iowa. He was crying. He told us that because our truck had made it through the pass when no one else could. A 7-year-old boy in septic shock had received the antibiotics he needed to survive the night. That was the moment. The sturdy girl, the girl who was good in the background, the girl who was locked in the attic, had just outsmarted the storm. The industry press picked up the story a week later. A local business journal ran a profile on me with the headline, "From Night Shift to CEO, How Rosalie Brewer Engineered a Miracle." The article detailed my background. It mentioned my time sorting packages. It mentioned my scholarships. It painted me as a gritty, self-made prodigy. I admit, I checked my phone more often that week. I waited for a text from Mark, maybe even a grudging message from Madison. There was nothing. The silence from Willow Creek was absolute. It was a silence louder than any shout. It confirmed that their neglect wasn't just about my failures. It was indifferent to my successes. To them. I wasn't a person who did things. I was just a character they had written out of the show. 2 years later, North Meridian Freight came knocking. They were one of the largest logistics conglomerates in the world. They didn't want to compete with our algorithm. They wanted to own it. The negotiations took 6 months. I sat across the table from men in suits that cost more than my father's garage. Men who reminded me of the guests at Lena's parties. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought I was just a lucky girl from Ohio. They didn't know they were negotiating with someone who had survived the attic. I held firm on the price. I held firm on the retention of my staff. And I held firm on my exit. When the deal finally closed, the wire transfer hit my account on a Tuesday afternoon. The number was staggering. $78 million. I stared at the screen. I thought about the $20 Grandpa Walter had slipped into my hand at the bus station. I thought about the socks Lena had wrapped for me. I thought about the cold floorboards. I didn't buy a sports car. I didn't go on a vacation to the Maldives. The first thing I did was hire a real estate agent in Harborfield. I told her I wanted something specific. I didn't want a cookie-cutter mansion in the suburbs. I wanted height. I wanted history. She showed me the old brick textile factory in the Arts District. It was a raw, industrial shell, sitting on top of the city like a crown. It had exposed pipes, massive steel beams, and windows that looked like cathedral arches. "It is a bit rough," the agent had said, her heels clicking on the concrete. "Most people find the layout challenging, and the roof access is tricky." I walked to the center of the vast, empty room. I looked up at the rusted iron spiral staircase that led to the old watchtower on the roof. "I will take it," I said. "Do you want to see the other options?" she asked, surprised. There is a lovely penthouse near the park with a pool. No, I said, looking up at the tower. This is the one, but I'm going to change the roof. I spent the next year overseeing the renovation with the same obsessive detail I had applied to my algorithms. I had the roof of the watchtower torn off. I replaced the brick and the slate with reinforced, structural glass. I turned the dark, claustrophobic lookout into a beacon of light. I designed it to be the anti-attic. The attic in Willow Creek had been a place of shame, dust, and darkness. My new attic would be a place of pride, clarity, and light. It would be a place where I could see everything: the storms, the stars, the city lights, but where the cold could never touch me again. I moved in just before Thanksgiving. I stood in the center of my multi-million-dollar fortress, surrounded by silence. I was rich, I was successful, I was untouchable. But as Christmas approached, and the city below me began to dress itself in red and gold, I felt that familiar ache. I had built the perfect castle, but I was the only one inside it. The victory felt hollow without witnesses. Then came the text from my father, just Lena's family. It was the spark that lit the fuse. I realized that building Aurora Lane hadn't just been about moving boxes. It had been about proving that I could redirect the flow. I could change the destination. I wasn't just going to be the CEO of a company anymore. I was going to be the CEO of this Christmas. And I was going to route the joy to the people who actually deserved it. Standing in the center of my living room, I felt the kind of silence that only serious money can buy. It was a thick, velvet silence, completely insulating me from the howling wind whipping off the frozen lake and the cacophony of the Christmas market 20 floors below. The Skyline penthouse was not just an apartment. It was an architectural rebuttal to every cold, cramped space I had ever occupied. The renovation had taken 18 months. I had flown in reclaimed teak from an old shipyard for the ceilings, giving the vast, modern space a warmth that felt almost biological. The fireplace was a massive slab of rough-hewn slate that stretched from the floor to the 18-foot ceiling, housing a gas fire that flickered with a hypnotic, controlled rage. But the true masterpiece was the view. The entire north wall was a sheet of tempered glass looking down on the Harborfield Town Square. From this height, the Christmas market was a sprawling tapestry of light and motion. I could see the red and white striped awnings of the vendor stalls, the microscopic skaters carving figure eights on the ice rink, and the giant spruce tree in the center, wrapped in thousands of blue-white LED lights that made the snow beneath it glow like sapphire dust. It was the kind of view people put on postcards. It was the kind of view that belonged to someone who had won. I walked to the spiral staircase, not the rickety, pull-down ladder of my childhood, but a sculpture of floating steel steps, and ascended to the upper level. This was my sanctuary, the glass attic. I had designed it specifically to rewrite the memory of Willow Creek. The old attic had been dark, smelling of fiberglass and dead flies, with a single dusty window that looked out on nothing. This room was a crystalline dome. The walls were glass. The ceiling was glass. It was like standing inside a diamond. I had furnished it with a deep, oversized armchair upholstered in cream wool, a thick Persian rug that swallowed my bare feet, and shelves lined with first editions of the books I used to read by flashlight. In the corner, a small, elegant Fraser fir stood in a heavy ceramic pot, decorated only with simple white lights and dried orange slices. It was a space of absolute exposure and absolute safety. I could see the storm, but the storm could not touch me. I sat in the chair, looking out at the gray sky. No one knew I was here. That was the most delicious part of the secret. I had purchased the unit through a shell company named Vantage Point Holdings, a nod to Grandpa Walter's advice. My name appeared on no deeds, no public records, to the world, and especially to the Brewer family back in Willow Creek. I was still Rosalie the workaholic, the girl who lived in a nondescript apartment near her office, the girl who was doing fine, but certainly not penthouse fine. Grandpa Walter knew I was in Harborfield, and he knew I was doing well, but even he did not know the extent of it. I think he imagined I lived in a nice condo with a doorman. He had no idea I was living in the sky. I looked down at my phone, at the text from my father that was still glowing on the screen. Christmas Eve this year. Just Lena's family. An hour ago, that text might have stung. It might have triggered that old, pathetic reflex to ask what I had done wrong, to offer to bring a side dish, to beg for a folding chair at the end of the table. But sitting here, surrounded by the empire I had built from the ashes of my own neglect, the text felt different. It didn't feel like a rejection. It felt like a permission slip. They had drawn a line in the sand. They had defined family as a circle that did not include me. Fine. If I wasn't part of their circle, I would draw a new one, a bigger one, a higher one. I pulled up my contacts. My thumb hovered over Aunt April's name. April was my father's younger sister, a woman with a loud laugh and a messy life who had slowly been pushed out of the Brewer orbit because she refused to kiss Lena's ring. She hadn't been to Christmas Eve dinner in 3 years. I pressed call. Hello? April answered on the second ring. She sounded out of breath, like she was wrestling groceries. Aunt April, I said, keeping my voice steady. It is Rosalie. Rosie. Oh my gosh. Honey, I was just thinking about you. I saw a truck with your old company's logo on it the other day and I told the cashier, that is my niece. She wrote the code for that. I smiled. It was genuine. That is sweet. April, listen, I am calling about Christmas Eve. There was a pause. The rustling of grocery bags stopped. Oh, yeah, I heard. Mark isn't. Well, I guess they are keeping it small this year. I am sorry. Honey, I know it hurts. It doesn't hurt, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. Actually, it is perfect, because it means you are free. What are you doing on the 24th? Me? April let out a dry, self-deprecating laugh. Probably ordering Chinese food and watching reruns with the kids. Noah is working a shift at the record store until 6, so it is not much of a party. Cancel the Chinese food, I said. I want you to come to Harborfield. I want you and Noah and the kids I am hosting this year. Harborfield? April hesitated. Rosie, that is a long drive, and with the kids, and hotels are so expensive this time of year. No hotels, I interrupted. You are staying with me. I have plenty of room. Pack a bag for 3 days. I am sending a car for you at noon on the 24th. A car? Honey, you don't have to. April, I said, putting a little bit of CEO steel into my voice. I have a place, a big place, and it is right above the Christmas market. The kids can watch the skaters from the window. Please, I don't want to spend Christmas alone, and I don't think you do either. You have a view of the market? April asked, her voice softening with wonder. I have a view of everything, I promised. Okay, she whispered, sounding suddenly tearful. Okay, we will come. It sounds magical. Rosie. It will be, I said. But April, if I can get Grandpa Walter to come, would that be okay? If you can get Walter out of that house, April laughed, a wet, happy sound. I will cook the turkey myself. I miss him, Rosie. We never see him since. Well, since the family split up. Leave it to me, I said. I hung up and immediately dialed Noah. He answered in a whisper, probably from the back of the record store. He agreed instantly, sounding relieved to escape a silent night at home. Then I called Aunt Caroline in Wisconsin. She was shocked to hear from me, but when I mentioned April was coming and that there would be no Lena, her hesitation evaporated. Then, I stared at the phone for a long time before dialing the final number. Grandpa Walter. He was 82 now. His hip was bad. He barely left the cottage in Willow Creek. The last time I saw him, he looked frail, like a piece of parchment paper that might crumble if you touched it too hard. He hated travel. He hated the cold. But he was the reason I was here. I dialed. The phone rang 4 times. Brewer residence, his gravelly voice answered. Grandpa, I said. It is Rosalie. Rosie. His voice warmed instantly. I was just looking at that article about you again. The one in the frame. You doing okay? You warm enough up there in the city? I am warm, Grandpa, I said. But I miss you. I miss you too, kid. But you know how it is. Roads are bad. I know, I said. But I need you to do something for me. I need you to come to Harborfield for Christmas Eve. Oh, honey, he sighed, the fatigue heavy in his tone. I can't. My hip is acting up. And the drive, it is too much for me. You know I don't travel well anymore. I will send a private car, I said. A big one, with heated seats. You won't have to drive a mile, door to door. It is not just the drive, Rosie, he said softly. I am tired. I am an old man. I am better off sitting here with my pipe. I took a deep breath. I looked up at the glass ceiling of my attic, at the gray clouds swirling above. I knew I had to use the one weapon I had, the truth. Grandpa, I said quietly, do you remember the last time we spent Christmas Eve together? Silence on the other line. He remembered. Of course he remembered. I remember, he rasped. You came up to the attic for me, I said. You climbed those stairs with your bad knee and you pulled me out of the dark. You told me that people in the attic see the truth. I did, he whispered. Well, I said, leaning forward in my chair, I built a new attic. Grandpa, it is made of glass. It is full of light. It sits on top of the whole city, and I want you to come sit in it with me. I want you to see what happens when the girl in the attic ends up owning the roof. I don't want to do it without you. I need you to see it. There was a long silence. I could hear the clock ticking in his hallway through the phone line. I held my breath. Glass? He asked finally. All glass, I said. And no locks. The door is wide open, but only for the right people. I heard a sound that might have been a chuckle, or a sob, or both. Well, he said, his voice thick with emotion, I suppose I can't let you sit up there alone. Who else is going to drink your whiskey? I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 10 years. I will have the best bottle waiting for you. All right, Rosie, he said. Send the car. I am coming. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the victory wash over me. It was sweeter than the $78 million. It was sweeter than the penthouse view. I had them. I had the family. The real family. Then, the CEO part of my brain clicked back online. I had 48 hours. I stood up and walked to the kitchen island. I opened my laptop. This was not going to be a potluck. This was not going to be a casual hangout. This was going to be an operation. I opened a spreadsheet. I labeled the columns. Transport, accommodation, menu, ambiance, security. I started typing furiously. Transport. I needed a luxury SUV service for the Willow Creek pickup. Something with air suspension so Grandpa's hip wouldn't hurt. I needed a separate car for April and the kids. Accommodation. The penthouse had 3 guest bedrooms, but I needed to configure them. Fresh linens, high thread count. I wanted robes in every room. I wanted chocolates on the pillows. I wanted them to feel like royalty. Menu. I didn't want to cook. I wanted to host. I needed a chef. Someone who understood comfort food but elevated. No foams, no tiny portions. I wanted a turkey that looked like a painting. I wanted mashed potatoes that tasted like butter and clouds. Seating. This was crucial. At Lena's house, there was always a kids' table or a hierarchy of seating. The important people sat near the center. The afterthoughts sat at the edges. I typed, 1 long table, no head of the table, everyone sits together. I paused, looking at the screen. I was treating this dinner like a board meeting, or a product launch. And in a way, I was launching a new reality for my family. I was creating a controlled environment where, for one night, the people who had always been treated as second-class citizens would be the guests of honor. I looked up at the ceiling again. Okay, I said aloud to the empty, beautiful room. Let's show them what happens when the sturdy girl runs the show. I picked up my phone again to call the concierge service. I had a lot of work to do. This wasn't just dinner, it was a trial, and the evidence was going to be overwhelming. The verdict, I decided, would be joy, Unadulterated, expensive, undeniable joy. With the guest list finalized and the transport arranged, my focus shifted from logistics to atmosphere. I had spent years building efficient systems for moving cargo across frozen highways. But now I was engineering something far more delicate. I was engineering a feeling. I wanted to create a sensation of absolute, unshakable warmth, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you forget that you were ever cold. I hired Marco D'Angelo, a freelance chef I had met at a charity fundraiser the year before. Marco was a large, boisterous Italian-American man with hands the size of catcher's mitts and a philosophy about food that aligned perfectly with my mission. He didn't believe in foam, or tiny portions, or food that looked like architecture. He believed in feeding people. When he arrived at the penthouse at 10 in the morning on December 24th, he brought with him the scent of garlic, rosemary, and yeasty dough. "We are not doing fancy. Rosalie," I told him as he unpacked his knives in my gleaming industrial kitchen, "I don't want a 7-course tasting menu where everyone is afraid to use the wrong fork. I want a feast. I want it to feel like the Sunday dinner we never got to have." Marco nodded, tying his apron. "Family style," he said, his voice booming. "Platters, heavy bowls, food you have to pass to each other. That is how you fix a family. Bellissima. You make them pass the potatoes." The menu we designed was a direct rebuttal to the cold, catered canapés of Lena's parties. Lena's food was always about appearance. It was miniature quiches that were cold by the time you ate them and intricate hors d'oeuvres that left you hungry. Our menu was about abundance. The centerpiece was a 20-pound turkey, rubbed with sage, thyme, and enough butter to make a cardiologist weep. But because I knew not everyone liked turkey, we also had a whole side of salmon, roasted with lemon slices and dill until it was falling apart. There would be a mountain of garlic mashed potatoes, the real kind, with lumps and skins left in, and roasted root vegetables glazed in balsamic vinegar and honey until they shone like dark jewels. For dessert, Marco was preparing a table that looked like a bakery explosion. He was baking biscotti with almonds and dried cherries, a massive tiramisu dusted with dark cocoa powder, and trays of gingerbread cookies that were soft, not the rock-hard kind meant for decorating. "It smells like heaven in here," I said, leaning against the counter as Marco began chopping onions. "It smells like home," Marco corrected me, or at least, what home is supposed to smell like. While Marco worked his magic in the kitchen, turning the air savory and rich, I turned my attention to the living room. I had hired a small acoustic duo, a violinist and a guitarist, from the local conservatory. I gave them strict instructions. I wanted holiday music, but I didn't want the frantic jingle bell pop songs that blared in every shopping mall. I wanted the slow, soulful versions. I wanted jazz arrangements of Silent Night and The First Noel that sounded like they were being played in a smoky club in 1950. I wanted the music to be a backdrop for conversation, not a competition for volume. Then, I started on the decorations. The Skyline penthouse was modern. It was all glass, steel, and polished concrete. It was impressive, but it could easily feel cold, like a museum or a hotel lobby. I needed to soften it. I needed to wrap the sharp edges in wool. I spent 3 hours on a ladder, winding strings of golden fairy lights around the reclaimed timber beams of the ceiling. I didn't use the cool white LEDs that look like ice. I used the warm white bulbs that glow like candlelight. I draped garlands of fresh pine and cedar along the railings of the staircase and the banisters of the upper mezzanine. The smell of the fresh greens mixed with Marco's roasting garlic, creating a perfume that was intoxicating. I hung a massive wreath made of dried magnolia leaves and cranberries on the main glass wall, framing the view of the Christmas market below. And in the corner, near the fireplace, stood the tree. It was a 12-foot noble fir. I had decided against the perfectly color-coordinated ornaments that Lena favored. Lena's trees were always themed. One year all silver, the next all blue. You were terrified to touch them. My tree was tactile. I decorated it with ornaments made of wood, felt, and paper. There were carved wooden stars, little felt foxes and bears, and garlands of popcorn and dried cranberries that I had strung myself the night before. It looked organic. It looked touchable. It looked like a tree that a child would want to curl up under, not a tree that a magazine photographer would want to light. By 4 in the afternoon, the sun had set, and the apartment was glowing. The fire was crackling in the slate hearth. The lights of the city below were twinkling through the glass. It was breathtaking. I moved to the dining area. I had pushed 2 large tables together to create one long, continuous surface. I covered it with a simple linen runner, leaving the wood exposed. I set the places with heavy earthenware plates and mismatched vintage silverware I had collected from antique shops. Then came the seating chart. I took a stack of heavy cream cardstock and a fountain pen. I wrote the names carefully. Noah, April, Caroline, Walter. At Lena's house, the seating was political. Mark sat at the head. Lena sat at the foot. The most important guests sat in the middle. The children and the less successful relatives were relegated to the ends or worse, the folding table in the hallway. I looked at my long table. There was no head. There was no foot. I placed the cards deliberately. I put Noah, the indie musician who was usually ignored, right next to Aunt Caroline, who loved classical music but never had anyone to talk to about it. I put April's youngest daughter next to Grandpa Walter's spot, because I knew he loved telling stories to kids who actually listened. I mixed the generations. I mixed the personalities. I was weaving the family back together, thread by thread. Finally, I climbed the spiral stairs to the glass attic. This was the most important space. This was the heart of the operation. The room was silent and cool, floating above the warmth of the party prep below. I checked the small tree I had placed in the corner. Its white lights reflected in the glass walls, creating an infinity effect of stars. I walked over to the armchair I had bought specifically for Grandpa. It was a wingback chair upholstered in soft, worn leather, the kind that creaks when you settle into it. I draped a heavy wool blanket over the arm, a tartan pattern in forest green and navy. Next to the chair, I placed a small side table. On it, I set a crystal tumbler and a bottle of 18-year-old single malt scotch, his favorite. I also placed a small stack of books, a history of the Civil War, a biography of Churchill, and a collection of Robert Frost poems. Then, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver picture frame. I placed it on the table, angling it so it would be the first thing he saw when he sat down. It was a photo from 1998. I was 10 years old. I was standing in the snow in the backyard of the Willow Creek house, wearing a lopsided snowman hat. Grandpa Walter was standing next to me, his hand on my shoulder, laughing at something I had said. It was one of the only photos from my childhood where I looked genuinely happy. In almost every other picture in the family albums, I was in the background, looking watchful and anxious. But in this one, I was just a child, and he was just my grandpa. I stared at the photo for a long moment, my throat tight. This room was my gift to him. It was my way of saying, "You were right. The view from the attic is better, but it is better when you are warm." I had one more thing to place in the room. I pulled a polished wooden box from the shelf. It was simple, made of walnut, with a brass latch. I set it on the coffee table in the center of the room. Inside the box was the document Grandpa had finalized with his lawyer earlier that week. It was the updated deed to the Willow Creek house, along with the paperwork transferring ownership of the family land to me effective immediately, not upon his death. He had insisted on doing it now. He wanted to see the transfer happen. He wanted to know, while he was still breathing, that Lena could never touch it. I closed the lid of the box. It sat there like a loaded weapon, or perhaps a shield. It was the physical proof that the power dynamic had shifted. I went back downstairs to the kitchen island. I had set up a small station near the entrance that I called the Wish Corner. It was a tray filled with small, high-quality paper cards and several heavy fountain pens. In the center was a glass bowl. Next to it was a small sign I had handwritten, "Leave behind what hurt you this year. Take with you what will heal you." It was a variation of a game Grandpa used to play with me when I was hiding in the attic. He would ask me, "What are we leaving up here in the dust? Rosie?" And I would say, "We are leaving the mean thing Lena said." And he would say, "Good. Now what are we taking downstairs?" And I would say, "My bravery." I wanted everyone to play it tonight. I wanted April to leave behind her insecurity. I wanted Noah to leave behind his feeling of being a disappointment. I wanted us to verbalize the transition from being the leftover family to being the chosen family. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the concierge from the lobby. "Miss Brewer," the smooth voice said, "just confirming the guest list for this evening." "Yes," I said, my voice shifting from nostalgic to executive. "You have the list of approved guests. The first car with my aunt and cousins should be arriving in 20 minutes. The second car with my grandfather will be about an hour behind them." "Understood," the concierge said. "And regarding uninvited guests?" I walked over to the security monitor on the wall. I could see the camera feed of the lobby. It was empty and serene, decorated with white poinsettias. "There are 3 specific names," I said, my voice hardening. "Mark Brewer, Lena Brewer, Madison Brewer. If anyone matching those descriptions or names attempts to access the elevator, I want to be notified immediately. Do not let them up. Do not tell them who is here. Just hold them at the desk and call me." "Understood. Miss Brewer, we have flagged the names in the system." "Thank you," I said. I hung up. I looked at the security panel. A small red light blinked steadily, indicating the system was armed. It was a necessary precaution. I knew my father. I knew Lena. They were predictable. If they found out we were all here, if a stray social media post or a slip of the tongue revealed our location, they wouldn't just be angry. They would be compelled to intrude. They would see our joy as a theft. They would see our gathering as a mutiny. But I was ready for them. I smoothed the front of my dress. It was a deep emerald green silk, elegant and commanding. I wasn't the girl in the oversized wool sweater anymore. I walked over to the window and looked down at the market one last time. The snow was falling harder now, blurring the lights into a watercolor painting. The stage was set, the food was cooking, the lights were on, the attic was open. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of pine and sage. "Okay," I whispered. "Come on up." The elevator doors slid open with a soft, expensive hush, breaking the stillness of the penthouse. It was precisely 6 o'clock. My Aunt April stood there, holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Old habits die hard, flanked by her 2 children, Leo and Maya. For a second, nobody moved. They just stared. From the entryway, the entire apartment unfolded like a panoramic cinema screen. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls framed the night perfectly. Below us, Harborfield was buried in white, but it was a glowing, radiant white. The lights from the Christmas market 20 floors down cast a sapphire and gold haze that drifted up toward us. The giant spruce tree in the town square looked like a glowing toy. Its star level with my knees from this altitude. "Oh my God," April whispered. She almost dropped the casserole. "Rosie, you live here?" "I do," I said, stepping forward to take the dish from her trembling hands. "Welcome home, April." The kids broke the spell. 7-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Maya let out identical squeals of delight and sprinted toward the glass wall. "Whoa!" Leo shouted, pressing his hands and nose against the pane. "Mom, look! The skaters look like ants! The ants are ice skating!" In Lena's house, this would have been the moment where the shouting started. "Don't touch the glass. You are smudging it. Go play in the basement." I watched April tense up, her shoulders rising, waiting for me to scold them. Instead, I walked over to a cedar chest near the sofa and pulled out 2 thick hand-knit sweaters I had bought the day before. "It is pretty high up, right?" I said, kneeling down next to Maya. "But it is cold near the glass. Here, put these on." I pulled the sweater over Maya's head. She popped out, giggling, her hair full of static. "Can we go on the balcony?" Leo asked, pointing to the sliding doors. April opened her mouth to say no, but I beat her to it. "We can," I said, "but not all at once. We take turns. And nobody goes out without a grown-up. That is the rule of the roof. Deal? Deal, they shouted. April let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping 3 inches. She looked at me, her eyes wet. You are really good with them, Rosie. I forgot. I forgot you used to be the one who actually raised them at those parties. I learned from the best, I said, winking. Or rather, I learned from the worst how not to do it. 10 minutes later, the elevator chimed again. It was Noah. My cousin looked like he always did. Shaggy hair, flannel shirt, carrying a guitar case that was held together with duct tape. He stepped in, took one look at the view, and let out a low whistle. Okay, he said, grinning. So the rumors were true. You are basically Bruce Wayne now. Something like that, I laughed, but with better holiday spirit. Noah didn't just stand around awkwardly holding a drink. He walked straight over to the 2 musicians I had hired. I watched him exchange a few words with the violinist, gesturing to his guitar. The violinist nodded, smiling. Noah unpacked his instrument, tuned it quickly, and within moments, he was weaving a soft, intricate acoustic line into their rendition of Silver Bells. It changed the energy of the room entirely. It wasn't background music anymore. It was a jam session. It felt organic. It felt like a living room, not a performance hall. Then came the arrival I had been holding my breath for. The concierge called up. Your grandfather is on his way up. Miss Brewer? I stood by the elevator doors. My hands were sweating. I wiped them on my silk dress. The doors opened. Grandpa Walter stood there. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe the elevator was just very large. He was wearing his heavy charcoal wool coat, the one he had worn for 20 years, and a checkered scarf wrapped tight around his neck. He was leaning heavily on his cane, his breathing audible in the quiet foyer. He didn't move at first. He just looked at me. Then he looked past me, at the soaring timber ceilings, the roaring fire, and the wall of glass that held the storm at bay. Grandpa, I said softly. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the light. He stepped out, the cane making a solid thud on the limestone floor. Well, he rasped, his voice rough with emotion. You really did it, didn't you, kid? I did, I said. Let me take your coat. I helped him out of the heavy wool. Underneath, he was wearing his best suit, the one he usually saved for funerals and weddings. It was a little loose on him now, but he had polished his shoes until they shone. He walked slowly toward the window. The kids were occupied with Marco in the kitchen. He was letting them decorate cookies before dinner, so the room was relatively quiet. Walter stood at the edge of the glass. He looked down at the city. He looked at the snow swirling in the void between us and the ground. You know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I spent my whole life telling you that the attic was a good place to see the truth, but I always thought of attics as dark places, cramped places. He turned to look at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. This is the first time in my life I have seen the attic on top of everything, and it is so beautiful. Rosie, it is so full of light. I want to show you something, I said. Can you manage a few stairs? Or we can take the lift to the mezzanine. I can walk, he said stubbornly. I want to walk. We took the spiral stairs slowly, step by step, thump, step, thump, step. It was the same rhythm I had heard on the floorboards that night in Willow Creek, but this time, he wasn't coming to rescue me. I was bringing him to his throne. We reached the glass attic. The room was silent, suspended in the sky. The snow was falling heavily now, sliding down the curved glass ceiling like stars falling in slow motion. The only light came from the small tree in the corner and the glow of the city below. Grandpa stopped. He looked at the wingback chair. He looked at the bottle of 18-year-old scotch. And then, he saw the photo. He walked over to the side table. His hand, shaking slightly, reached out and touched the silver frame. He picked it up. He stared at the image of the 10-year-old girl in the snowman hat and the grandfather who loved her. I remember this day, he said, his voice cracking. It was the day you told me you wanted to be an astronaut, because you wanted to go somewhere where no one could yell at you. I didn't make it to the moon, I said, moving to stand beside him. But I got pretty high up. You did, he said. He placed the photo back down gently. He sat in the chair, letting out a long sigh as the leather held him. You did good, Rosie. You did so good. We sat there for a moment in the silence. We didn't need to say anything else. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was filled with the years of secrets, the shared glances across dinner tables, the cocoa in the dark. It was a silence that had finally found a home. Dinner is served, Marco's voice boomed from downstairs, breaking the spell. Come on, Grandpa said, slapping his knee. I smell rosemary, and I am starving. We went down to the long table. It was a masterpiece. Marco had laid out platters of golden turkey, glistening salmon, and bowls of roasted vegetables that steamed in the cool air. The candles flickered, reflecting in the wine glasses. I watched everyone find their seats. There was a moment of hesitation, a muscle memory of looking for the hierarchy. April looked for the bad seat. Noah looked for the corner. Anywhere, I said, spreading my hands. Sit anywhere you want. There is no head of the table here. Grandpa sat in the middle. I sat on his right. April sat on his left. The kids squeezed in between Noah and Caroline. As we passed the food, heavy ceramic bowls moving from hand to hand, laughter bubbling up as Leo tried to serve himself a mountain of potatoes, I realized this was the first Christmas dinner of my life where I didn't feel a knot in my stomach. I wasn't waiting for the criticism. I wasn't waiting to be sent to fetch something. I was just eating. When the plates were cleared and the tiramisu was being served, I stood up. Before we do dessert, I said, tapping my glass with a spoon, I want to do something. Grandpa and I used to have a tradition. I pointed to the wish corner. I had brought the glass bowl and the stack of cards to the table. It is simple, I explained. You write down one thing you are leaving behind in the old year, a hurt, a fear, a bad habit, and you write down one thing you are taking with you, and then we read them. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I think it helps. I passed the pens around. For a few minutes, the only sound was the scratching of ink on paper and the soft jazz from Noah and the band. April went first. She stood up, her face flushed with wine and emotion. Okay, she said, her voice trembling a little. I am leaving behind. The guilt of not going to Mark's house. The guilt of feeling like a bad sister because I didn't want to be insulted anymore. She took a deep breath. And I am taking with me my peace, the right to have a peaceful holiday with my kids. Here, Noah said, raising his glass. Noah went next. He didn't stand, but he looked around the table with a serious expression. I am leaving behind waiting for applause from people who don't even like my music, and I am taking with me, playing for the people who actually listen. He clinked his glass against mine. Then, it was Grandpa Walter's turn. The table went quiet. He adjusted his glasses. He held the small card with both hands. His hands were gnarled and spotted with age, but they didn't shake this time. I am leaving behind, he started, his voice gravelly and deep. The silence of a grandfather who stood by and watched his granddaughter be pushed into the shadows. I am leaving behind the shame of not speaking up sooner. He paused. April wiped a tear from her cheek. And I am taking with me, he continued, looking straight at me, the determination to spend whatever time I have left making sure that every door she walks up to opens, and if it doesn't open, I will kick it down. The room erupted. Noah cheered. April was openly crying now. I felt hot tears pricking my own eyes. It was an apology and a vow wrapped in one. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up. I looked at the faces around the table. My real family. The people who saw me. I am leaving behind, I said, my voice steady. The girl who knocked on doors that were never meant for her. I am leaving behind the need to be invited. I looked up at the glass ceiling, at the storm raging impotently above us. And I am taking with me the right to build my own attic, the right to own the roof, and the absolute power to decide who gets to walk through that door and who has to stay out in the cold. I raised my glass high. "Merry Christmas, everyone." "Merry Christmas," they shouted back, a chorus of voices that filled the high ceilings. We drank, we laughed. Marco brought out the biscotti. Noah started playing Feliz Navidad, and the kids started dancing around the table. It was perfect. It was warm. It was safe. We had no idea that 20 floors below us, a black sedan had just screeched to a halt in the valet lane. We had no idea that Mark, Lena, and Madison were storming through the lobby, their faces twisted with confusion and entitlement, demanding to see the manager. We were in the eye of the storm, enjoying the light, blissfully unaware that the wind was about to try and blow our house down one last time. The collapse of the evening began, as most modern disasters do, with a smartphone. We were gathered around the fireplace, the remnants of Marco's feast scattered on the coffee table. The air was thick with the scent of pine and contentment. Leo, my 7-year-old nephew, had borrowed his mother's phone to take pictures of the tree. He was obsessed with the way the fairy lights reflected in the glass walls, creating the illusion that the stars were trapped inside the room with us. I watched him tapping away, unaware that his small fingers were about to pull the pin on a grenade. He posted a story to April's Instagram account. It was a video, panning from the glistening turkey carcass to the laughing group on the sofa, and finally to the breathtaking view of the Harborfield Square below. He added a location tag, Harborfield Skyline Lofts, rooftop penthouse, and he added a caption that a 7-year-old would consider innocent, but a narcissist would consider a declaration of war. Best Christmas ever. I did not know this was happening. I was too busy pouring Grandpa Walter another finger of scotch and listening to him tell Noah about the winter of 1952. But 3 hours away, in the silent, pristine living room of the house in Willow Creek, the digital signal landed. I later pieced together the scene from the furious accusations that followed. Mark and Lena had been sitting in a room that was quiet, too quiet. Their intimate family Christmas had turned into a vacuum. There were no guests to impress. There was no audience for Madison's performance, just 3 people eating a meal that tasted like obligation. Then, the notifications started. Friends of the family, the nosy neighbors, the church choir members, saw April's story. They saw the view. They saw the luxury. And most damning of all, they saw the joy. Texts began to flood Lena's phone. "I thought you said Rosalie was working. Is that the Skyline building? I heard units there go for millions. Why is Walter there and not with you?" Lena must have clicked the video. She must have seen the frame where Grandpa Walter was throwing his head back in laughter, his hand resting on my shoulder, looking happier than he had looked in 20 years. She must have heard Madison's bitter commentary, the shock of realizing that the night shift girl wasn't struggling in a basement somewhere, but was looking down on the world from a height they couldn't even afford to visit. And my father, Mark Brewer, the man who cared more about public perception than private morality, must have snapped. The narrative was slipping away from him. He wasn't the patriarch anymore. He was the man left behind. In a fit of impulsive, ego-driven rage, he packed them into the car. He drove 3 hours through a snowstorm, not to reconcile, but to reclaim his property. He came to take back the spotlight. We were oblivious. We were singing Silent Night when the intercom buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound that cut through the violin music like a knife. The room went silent. I walked to the wall monitor. The concierge's face appeared, looking apologetic but firm. "Miss Brewer," he said, "I am sorry to disturb you, but there is a Mr. Mark Brewer here in the lobby. He is with a woman and a young lady. He claims to be your father. He is quite insistent on coming up." I felt the blood drain from my face, not from fear, but from a sudden, cold clarity. April gasped, dropping her wine glass. It shattered on the rug, a splash of red that looked violent against the cream wool. "He came? He actually drove here?" "He is demanding to see you," the concierge continued. "He says it is a family emergency. Should I call the police? or just send them away? I looked at the monitor. I could see them in the background of the shot. Mark was pacing. Lena was arguing with a security guard, pointing a manicured finger at the elevator bank. Madison was standing back, looking at her phone, looking small. "Rosie," April whispered, clutching Leo to her chest. "Don't let them up. Please. They will ruin it." "I know," I said. I turned to the room. The warmth had evaporated. The tension was back. The old familiar brewer tension that tightened your chest and made it hard to breathe. Then, I looked at Grandpa Walter. He was sitting in the wingback chair, his hands gripping the arms. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked like granite. "Grandpa," I said, my voice steady, "it is your call. I can tell security to escort them out. We never have to see them, or we can handle this." Walter stood up. It was a slow, painful process, his bad hip protesting, but he waved away my offer of help. He grabbed his cane. He adjusted his suit jacket. "Escorting them out is too easy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "If we send them away, they will spend the rest of their lives telling people you slammed the door in their faces. They will play the victim, again." He walked toward the elevator. "I am going down there," he said. "I am going to close the door myself, and I am going to make sure they understand why it is locked." "I am coming with you," I said. "Me too," Noah said, standing up and putting down his guitar. "No," Walter said sharply. "Noah, stay here. Protect the room. Keep the music playing for the kids. Rosalie, you come. You are the owner of the building. You need to be there." We took the elevator down in silence. As the numbers on the display ticked down, 20, 19, 18, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the girl in the attic anymore. I was standing in a lift that cost more than my father's car, next to the man who had saved my life. The doors opened on the ground floor. The lobby of the Skyline Lofts was a cavernous space of marble and glass, currently decorated with white poinsettias and a 20-foot silver tree. Mark, Lena, and Madison were standing near the front desk. They looked disheveled from the drive. Mark's coat was wet with snow. Lena's hair was windblown. When they saw us step out of the elevator, they froze. For a second, they didn't recognize me, in my emerald silk dress, with my hair swept up and my posture straight. I didn't look like the daughter who hauled boxes, and Grandpa Walter, standing beside me with a face like a thunderstorm, looked terrifying. "Dad?" Mark said, his voice echoing in the large space. "Rosalie?" Lena recovered first. She marched toward us, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "We see videos of you having a party with our family while we are sitting at home worrying about you." "Worrying?" I repeated, arching an eyebrow. "You knew exactly where I was. You uninvited me, remember? Just Lena's family." "That was a misunderstanding," Mark blustered, stepping up beside his wife. He looked around the lobby, taking in the opulence, the doorman, the sheer wealth of the building. His eyes narrowed. "And what is this, Rosalie? You rent a penthouse to show off? You are trying to embarrass us? Trying to buy everyone's affection with this display?" "She didn't rent it, Mark," Walter said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried such weight that the two concierges behind the desk stopped typing to listen. Walter stepped forward, placing himself between me and them. "She owns it," Walter said. "Every square inch, from the lobby to the roof." Madison's head snapped up. "She owns the building?" "She owns the penthouse," Walter corrected. "And she earned it. While you were buying dresses, she was working night shifts. While you were sleeping, she was building." "That is not the point," Lena shrieked. Realizing she was losing the status game, she pivoted to the moral attack. "The point is that she stole our Christmas. She manipulated April. She dragged an old man out into the snow just to spite us. It is cruel. Rosalie, you are a cruel, vindictive girl." "Stop it," Walter barked. He slammed the tip of his cane onto the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot. "Do not speak to her," Walter said. pointing a shaking finger at Lena. Do not look at her. You want to talk about cruelty? Let's talk about cruelty. He looked at the concierge, then at the few residents who had paused on their way to the elevators. He wanted witnesses. 1999, Walter said, his voice rising. Christmas Eve, a blizzard. You didn't like her tone. You didn't like that she defended her dead mother. So what did you do? Lena paled. Walter, please, that is ancient history. You locked her in an unheated attic, Walter announced to the room. You put a padlock on the door. You left a 19-year-old girl to freeze in the dark while you ate turkey downstairs. You treated a human being like a piece of broken furniture. Mark looked like he wanted to vanish into the floor. Dad, keep your voice down. I will not keep it down, Walter roared. I kept it down for 20 years. I let you smooth it over. I let you pretend it was discipline, but not tonight. Tonight, we look at the ledger. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. He pulled out a blue legal folder. You said she is trying to buy affection? Walter asked, looking at his son with profound disappointment. Rosalie doesn't need to buy anything. She has more integrity in her little finger than you have in your whole life. He held up the folder. This is my will, Mark, the new one. Mark's eyes widened. What? I signed it 3 weeks ago, Walter said. And I added an addendum this morning. The house in Willow Creek? The one you grew up in? The one you think you are going to inherit when I die so you can sell it and buy Lena a new car? Mark said nothing. He just stared at the blue folder. It is gone, Walter said. I transferred the deed. Today. It belongs to Rosalie now. You can't do that, Lena gasped. That is family property. She is the family, Walter countered. She is the only one who respects what that house means. And the land? Hers? The savings? Hers? He took a step closer to Mark. You chose your family, Mark. You chose Lena. You chose the easy life where you didn't have to protect your daughter because it might cause an argument. Well, you got what you wanted. You have your peace. You have your wife. But you don't have my house. And you certainly don't have my respect. Dad, Mark choked out, tears forming in his eyes. You are cutting me out? Over a Christmas party? I am not cutting you out over a party, Walter said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than the shouting. I am cutting you out because for 20 years, you watched your daughter live in an attic, and you never once tried to open the door. You let her be cold. Mark, you let your own child be cold. Walter turned to me. He looked tired now, the burst of energy fading, but he stood tall. Rosalie, he said, do you want them upstairs? The lobby was silent. Even the elevator chimes seemed to have paused. Mark looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a father, but as a man who was afraid. He looked at the luxury around me, then at the folder in Walter's hand. Rosie, he whispered, we are family. I looked at Lena, whose face was a mask of fury and calculation. I looked at Madison, who just looked lost, realizing the spotlight had moved permanently. No, I said. My voice was calm. It didn't shake. We aren't family. We are relatives. There is a difference. I turned to the concierge. These people are not on the guest list. Please ask them to leave. Rosalie! Mark shouted as I turned my back. Come on, Grandpa, I said, taking Walter's arm. The food is getting cold. We walked back to the elevators. I didn't look back. I could hear Mark arguing with the security guard, but his voice sounded distant, like a radio station fading out as you drive away from a town you don't live in anymore. Walter leaned heavily against the elevator wall as the doors slid shut, sealing us in. He let out a long, shuddering breath. You okay? I asked him. He looked at me and smiled. It was a weary smile, but it was real. I have been waiting to say that, he said. Since the day you were born. You did good, Grandpa, I said. You did really good. So did you, he said. You didn't scream. You didn't cry. You just commanded. I learned from the best, I said. The elevator dinged at the penthouse level. the doors opened. The warmth hit us immediately. The smell of cinnamon, the sound of the violin, the laughter of the children. It was a wall of light. "One thing, though," Walter said, pausing before we stepped back into the party. "What?" He tapped the blue folder in his hand. "They are going to be really mad when they find out I also left you the vintage truck." I laughed. It was a loud, unladylike sound that bubbled up from my chest. "The truck? Grandpa? That thing hasn't run in 10 years. "I know," he winked, "but Mark always wanted it." We walked back into the room. April looked up from the sofa, her eyes wide with worry. "Is it over?" she asked. "It is over," I said. "Did they—" She trailed off. "They left," Walter said, walking over to his chair. "And they won't be coming back without an invitation." I walked over to the window. I looked down, far below. I saw 3 tiny figures walking out of the building entrance, getting into a car, and driving away into the dark. They looked like sparks dying out in the snow. I turned back to the room, to the fire, to the tree, to the people who stayed. "Who wants dessert?" I asked. The lobby of the Skyline Lofts had fallen into a silence so profound that I could hear the hum of the heating vents 30 feet above our heads. Grandpa Walter had just dropped the anvil of truth. The revised will, the transfer of the deed, the exposure of 20 years of neglect, and the dust was still settling around us. My father, Mark, looked as though he had been physically struck. He stood with his mouth slightly open, his eyes darting between the blue folder in Walter's hand and my face. For the first time, I didn't see the busy, important businessman who didn't have time for his daughter. I saw a man who had traded his spine for a quiet life, and was now realizing that the price of that trade was everything he actually valued. Lena was vibrating with a rage that she could no longer hide behind her socialite mask. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't looking at me with regret. She was looking at me with the sheer, unadulterated fury of a predator that realizes the prey has not only escaped, but has stolen the hunting grounds. And then there was Madison. She stood a few feet behind her mother, clutching her designer purse. She looked from the luxurious marble floors to the concierge who was watching them with professional disdain. And then she looked at me. There was no mockery in her eyes tonight. There was just a terrifying, dawning realization. She was seeing the circle of warmth that I had built upstairs, the music, the food, the laughter, and she was realizing, for the first time in her life, that she was standing outside of it. The girl who had always been the center of the universe was suddenly just a spectator in the snow. Grandpa Walter turned to me. He ignored them entirely. He looked me in the eye, his expression grave and respectful. "Rosalie," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the cavernous space, "it is your house. It is your roof. Do you want them to come up?" He was handing me the weapon. He was giving me the power they had spent 2 decades stripping away from me. I looked at my father. I saw the desperate, pleading look in his eyes. He wanted me to say yes. He wanted me to fix it. He wanted to come upstairs, drink my wine, eat my turkey, and pretend that the last hour hadn't happened. He wanted the simplicity he always preached. I took a deep breath. The air in the lobby was cool, but I felt a fire burning in my chest. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, absolute and final. "Rosie, please," Mark started, taking a step forward. "We drove 3 hours." "No," I repeated, my voice calm. "Tonight is not for you. Tonight is for the people who were there when I had nothing. Tonight is for the people who sat with me when I was locked in the attic, not the people who turned the key." I saw Lena flinch. "If you want to talk," I continued, looking my father dead in the eye, "we can talk next week. We can meet for dinner at a restaurant, but there will be no Christmas tree. There will be no audience. There will be no pretending. Just the truth. If you are ready for that, call me. If not, drive safe." I turned away. Walter nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He turned back to his son one last time. "You heard her." "Mark," Walter said, his voice low and final. "This isn't cruelty. This is just the consequence of the Christmases you chose." He offered me his arm. I took it. We walked to the elevator bank, leaving the three of them standing in the harsh yellow light of the lobby, surrounded by white poinsettias that suddenly looked very cold. As the elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the sight of my father's slumped shoulders, the adrenaline that had been holding Grandpa Walter upright seemed to drain out of him all at once. He slumped against the handrail, his breathing coming in short, heavy gasps. "Grandpa?" I asked, grabbing his arm. "I am okay, kid," he wheezed, tapping his chest. "Just haven't shouted like that since 1968. Takes a lot out of an old man." "Let's get you sitting down," I said. When the elevator opened into the penthouse, the warmth hit us like a physical embrace, the smell of cinnamon and roasting meat, the soft strumming of Noah's guitar, the sound of Leo and Maya giggling on the balcony. It was a sensory overload of joy. I guided Walter past the main party. April looked up, saw his exhaustion, and started to stand, but I waved her down, signaling that I had it under control. I led him straight to the spiral staircase and helped him up, step by slow step, to the glass attic. I settled him into the wingback chair. He sank into the leather with a groan of pure relief. I poured him a glass of water from the carafe on the table, and he drank it in one long gulp. "Better?" I asked, kneeling beside his chair. "Much better," he said, the color returning to his cheeks. "The view helps." He gestured to the glass walls. The snow was still falling, swirling around our illuminated dome, but down below, the taillights of a black sedan were just disappearing around the corner of the square. They were gone. Walter reached into his jacket pocket again. He pulled out the wooden box I had placed there earlier, the one containing the documents. He set it on the small coffee table between us and opened the latch. "There is one more thing," he said. He reached under the blue folder containing the will and pulled out a single, heavy iron key and a separate, thinner document. "This," he said, holding up the key, "is the master key to the Willow Creek house, the front door, the back door, and yes, the attic." He placed the key in my palm. It was cold and heavy. "And this," he tapped the paper, "is a transfer of deed. I didn't just write you into the will. Rosie, I signed the house over to you this afternoon. It is done. It is filed. As of 4 o'clock today, you are the landlord. Mark and Lena are living there because you allow it." I stared at him, my mouth falling open. "Grandpa, you didn't have to do that. They will be furious." "Let them be furious," he said, his eyes fierce. "I can't go back and fix the years you spent shivering up there. I can't undo the slap. I can't undo the lonely nights at college." He reached out and covered my hand with his. His skin was like dry paper, but his grip was strong. "But I can guarantee you one thing, Rosalie. I can guarantee that from this moment until the day you die, any attic you step into will be one that you own. Any door you walk through will be one that you chose to open. You are never going to be a guest in your own life again." I felt the tears finally spill over. I didn't try to stop them. I leaned forward and buried my face in his shoulder, hugging him tightly. He smelled of scotch and old wool and absolute unconditional love. "Thank you," I sobbed into his coat. "Thank you for opening the door." "You walked out yourself, kid," he whispered, patting my back. "I just turned the handle." We stayed there for a while, just the two of us in the glass box above the city. Downstairs, the party continued. I could hear Noah singing a new song, something slow and improvised. I strained to hear the lyrics drifting up through the open mezzanine. "If the world is cold and the door is locked, if the table is full and the heart is blocked, come up to the roof where the lights burn bright. Whoever has no place, sit here tonight." It was the perfect anthem for our island of misfits. Eventually, the night wound down. The children fell asleep on the piles of cushions in the living room, their mouths stained with chocolate. April carried them to the guest rooms, looking more at peace than I had ever seen her. Noah packed up his guitar, hugging me for a long time at the door. "Best gig I ever played," he told me. Grandpa Walter was the last to retire. I walked him to the master guest suite. He looked tired, but it was a good tired. The tired of a soldier who has finally won the war. "Good night, CEO." He winked at me as he closed the door. "Good night, General," I whispered back. At 2 a.m, the penthouse was silent. The fire had died down to glowing embers. The only light came from the city below and the fairy lights reflecting in the glass. I walked back up to the glass attic. I stood in the center of the room, looking out. The market below was deserted now. The giant tree in the square was still lit, a lone beacon in the snow. I thought about the attic in Willow Creek. I remembered the smell of dust. I remembered the cold biting through my thin dress. I remembered the feeling of being small, of being an afterthought, of being trash to be stored away. Then I looked up at the glass ceiling above me. I saw the clouds parting slightly, revealing a single, bright star. I looked at the leather chair where my grandfather had sat. I looked at the deed on the table. I was standing in an attic again, but this time, I was the architect. My phone vibrated on the table, the sound loud in the silence. I picked it up. It was a text message. The name on the screen made my breath hitch. Madison. I opened it. "I am sitting in the back seat. Mom and Dad haven't stopped yelling for 2 hours. I wanted to say I saw the tree. Through the window. It looked beautiful." 3 dots appeared. She was typing. "I am not ready to apologize. I don't think I know how yet. But can I call you after the holidays? Just to talk?" I stared at the screen. A part of me, the angry, hurt part, wanted to type back no, wanted to tell her she had her chance. But then I looked at the wish bowl downstairs, where I had written that I was leaving behind the need to be invited. Madison was standing outside the door now. She was knocking. I didn't reply. Not yet. I wasn't going to save her tonight. She needed to sit in the cold for a little while to understand what warmth meant. But I didn't block her number. I saved the message. I left the door unlocked. Just a crack. I picked up my phone and opened the camera. I switched to video mode. I panned slowly around the room. I filmed the snow pressing against the glass walls. I filmed Grandpa's empty chair with the tartan blanket draped over it. I filmed the small tree with its wooden ornaments. I captured the silence. The heavy, beautiful, expensive silence of safety. I posted it to my story. 10 seconds of peace. I typed the caption. It was a message to the 19-year-old girl shivering in the dark, and to everyone else like her. To everyone who has ever spent Christmas feeling like the child in the attic. I hit post. I put the phone down. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders and sat in the chair, watching the snow fall on my city, on my roof, on my terms. And that is where the story of Rosalie Brewer ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It is a journey that is close to my heart, because we have all felt, at some point, like we were on the outside looking in. I want to ask you a question, and I really want you to be honest with yourself in the comments below. We are building a community here, not just an audience. If you are standing in the cold right now, if you are feeling locked out of the warmth you deserve, what is your next move? Option A. Will you continue to stand at the bottom of the stairs, knocking and waiting for someone else to unlock the door for you? Or option B. Will you turn around, walk away, and start laying the bricks to build your own glass attic, one where you hold the only key? Let me know in the comments. Are you an A or a B? Also, tell me where you are listening from. What city? What time is it there? I love seeing how far our family extends. If this story made you feel something, please hit that like button. It really helps the algorithm share this warmth with others who might need it. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories and turn on notifications. We have many more stories of justice, resilience, and turning the tables coming your way. Don't forget to hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. Until next time, don't let anyone lock you away. Build your own roof.